Listen to you on this. It comes.
Yes, don't listen to me on that.
You on this.
Hello, everybody. How are you? Well, thank you for sharing. Hi, Dolores. Hi, Kay. Hi, Lana. Hi, Dia. And hi, Steve Gonzo. I know there are more of you here, so hello to you too. So, what I want to begin with tonight is simple but sad news. Hi, Deborah. And the sad news is, hi, Steve Wolfbrand. That according to the Worldometer site, we have just passed the 450,000 fatality mark. 450,381, with another 2,889 fatalities today. 1,356 fatalities per million, which, neglecting smaller sovereignties, very small sovereignties, is eighth in the world. Eighth in the world. Bad news. Here's some good news with respect to vaccines. I'll share this one. It's by Sharon Zhang at Truth Out. And the piece is called "New Vaccine is so far 100% effective at preventing hospitalization." That's really the heart of this story. Johnson & Johnson announced on Friday its COVID-19 vaccine, which is a single shot vaccine, is 85% effective against severe COVID-19 infections. No study participants who received the vaccine either died or had to be hospitalized. By the way, this post was written on January 29th, 2021. The results also show the vaccine was 66% effective at preventing moderate to severe infections. The trials were conducted globally, and the vaccine was 72% effective when it comes to preventing moderate to severe infection in the United States. 62% in Latin America and 57% in South Africa. These results were generally consistent across age and race, the company says. But by the way, there were 44,000 people in these trials. In South Africa, 95% of the infections were due to the new, more transmissible variant of the virus. But some officials have said this strain is more resistant to antibody treatments. So far, only 2 cases of this strain have been identified in the United States. If I'm not mistaken, that was in South Carolina where they occurred. This vaccine could be authorized for use as early as the middle of February. And of course, Monday is February 1st. With Johnson & Johnson saying it plans to apply for emergency authorization of the vaccine from the FDA next week. The FDA will consider vaccines above 50% efficacy, and the J&J one exceeds that threshold by a considerable amount, it seems, especially in the United States, but even in South Africa. We've agreed, we being the U.S., to purchase 100 million doses of the J&J vaccine last summer if it proved effective. So it's proved effective, so we're going to purchase 100 million doses of it. Though it's less effective than the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines, the trial results are still promising. As some have pointed out, annual flu vaccines are only about 40 to 60% effective. So these vaccines are 85% to 57% effective. I'm sorry, 85% against severe, 72% if you look both across severe infections and moderate infections. So this vaccine is looking pretty good. It looks like it would be helpful. Its ability to prevent hospitalization and death at 100% success rate is crucial, says Sharon Chang. And I agree with her. And though the prevention of moderate infection varied across the regions it was tested, the 85% when applied to severe infections was consistent on a worldwide basis. In other words, that was true for South Africa too. It was able to prevent severe infection at 85% of the time. And again, the success rate was 100% in relation to preventing hospitalization and death. So that's the good news. Oh, here's another piece of good news with respect to it. It is much easier to store and transport than the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines. They need to be stored at minus 70 degrees and minus 20 degrees Celsius, respectively. In some places, improper storage has led to vaccines being thrown away. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine, on the other hand, can be stored at standard refrigerator temperatures for up to 3 months. So that is really good. This can be very helpful in creating herd immunity in the whole world. It's also cheaper than other vaccines, with the possible exception of the Oxford AstraZeneca regime. I'm not entirely sure whether that is less expensive or the J&J. Okay, it's less expensive, but the Oxford AstraZeneca comes in at about $2 a dose. So this is probably roughly about there as well. And that is very good because it means it can be used all over the world. So that's a piece of good news. So I wanted to deliver that before I go on to the main topics of discussion tonight. Next comes the threat, of our democracy, the threats to our democracy, quotes around the term democracy, because we all know it's not really a democracy anymore. And looking at these next two articles, we need to keep that in mind. We hope it will become a democracy, but that is an aspiration for us. It is not true yet. So next is an opinion piece from the week entitled um, 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 entitled Liberal Democracy's Achilles Heel. That was written by Damon Linker. And there's a picture of I guess it's a picture of an Achilles heel. It's a green Achilles heel. And I think it says Trump 2024, I believe, but keeping America great. Anyway, critics of liberal democracy have long accused it of being weak, more like a debating society obsessed with the fairness of its own rules than a vital force that can defend itself and triumph over hostile forms of politics, and ways of life. Some other people, though, have said, of liberal democracy, in Karl Popper's words, the Constitution is not a suicide pact. That's a comment. It's not something in the article. The historical record on this is mixed. On the positive side, but democracies, or at least those that are liberal democracies, have an impressive track record against external enemies. France fell to Hitler in 1940, but Great Britain stood its ground, and the United States worked in tandem with the Soviet Union to bring Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan to their knees. Well, the Soviet Union, of course, was not exactly a liberal democracy during that period, but rather a Stalinist totalitarian state. The Western powers, led by the United States, then stood toe-to-toe against the Soviets and their allies for decades and ultimately prevailed. But things are more muddled when it comes to liberal democracy's record against internal enemies. During the interwar period, the liberal governments performed poorly in many cases, with liberalism in Germany, Italy, Spain, and other countries collapsing in the face of anti-liberal challenges. In the interwar period between World War I and World War II, that is. More recently, numerous democracies have seen right-wing populist movements and parties emerge. So far, those that have risen to power have done so through liberal institutions, and despite moves to rig the systems in their own favor, most notably in Hungary and Poland. Nowhere has liberal government been fully overturned in favor of outright authoritarian rule, or worse. But the United States represents a distinctive and potentially ominous case. Over the past 3 months, the Republican Party has proven itself to be a right-wing, anti-liberal party. Yes, this has been the culmination of a long process. Yes, it has antecedents in the American past. Yes, there are still some decent people in the party trying to oppose the trend from within. But despite all these caveats, what we've recently witnessed in the GOP is something new and newly alarming. Less than 3 months ago, the president and head of the Republican Party refused to concede the results of a free and fair election. He then spent more than 2 months doing everything in his power to delegitimize it with lies, including the assertion without evidence that he had in fact won in a landslide, with his rightful victory denied him by a massive conspiracy involving officials of his own party at the state and local levels, as well as a slew of state and federal judges and most members of the media. Okay, I note here that he also asserted that he won by a landslide in 2016, though in electoral votes, he won by the same amount as Joe Biden just won in 2020. So in 2016, it was a landslide for him when he got 306 electoral votes. But when Biden got 306 electoral votes, it wasn't a landslide for him. Okay, so in both cases, of course, it was the Democratic candidate that got the popular vote, but there's Trump in both cases claiming a landslide. So these lies ultimately incited an insurrection against Congress as it was attempting to certify the results of the election. I think it's really hard to deny that. It did incite insurrectionist activity against the Congress, an actual physical attack on the Congress involving a search for Congress members with the evident intent of holding them hostage and murdering some of them, including the assertion that if they got a hold of him, they were going to murder the Vice President of the United States. If a few contingencies had unfolded differently on January 6th, members of Congress might have been taken hostage and the Vice President could well have ended up dead, says the article. Yet it looks increasingly unlikely that the now former president will be convicted of incitement in a Senate trial because so few Republicans are prepared to take a decisive stand against what he said and did in the aftermath of the 2020 election. This means that the Republican Party is now dominated by ideas and individuals who consider it acceptable to reject the legitimacy of democratic elections when they deliver a loss, and to encourage, affirm, and spread outright lies in order to gain and hold power. Okay, I have to comment here that it's hard to consider the elections democratic when they're decided by the Electoral College, which, of course, is an undemocratic institution designed to be undemocratic and undemocratic today, to this very day. So I don't know if I would call this, actually say this was a democratic election. Of course, if you look at the popular vote and you view the popular vote as establishing the legitimacy of the election, then from that point of view, it was democratic because Biden won by some 7 million votes. So anyway, the Republicans have encouraged, affirmed, and spread outright lies in order to gain and hold political power. That makes the Republican Party a great danger to liberal democratic government in the United States. I do agree with that. But what can be done about it? How can we defend liberal democratic institutions and norms from those organizing against it? What weapons can liberalism deploy in its own defense? The answer, unfortunately, is not many. Now, I have to say, I'm not at all sure, okay, that I agree with that. It's more a question of what weapons will the Democrats deploy, because we can't ask the Republicans, of course, to deploy those weapons, because they won't. They're not in control of the government in any case. But the Democrats are in control of the government. The obligation falls to them to use the weapons which exist in defense of democratic institutions and norms. What weapons do exist? Well, There's nothing stopping, from the standpoint of law, the Attorney General of the United States from prosecuting Donald Trump right now. Now, Joe Biden might not be willing to do it. It might cause great consternation in the country. But the weapons are there to be deployed. I'm not going through the article now. I'm giving my commentary. Just because Joe Biden seems to be dead set on ignoring those weapons doesn't mean the weapons are not there. It doesn't mean that people cannot be prosecuted for sedition. It doesn't mean Congresspeople cannot be prosecuted for sedition. As long as we're talking about the weapons that constitutionally exist. The question is, will the Democrats employ those weapons? It's not whether they exist or do not exist. The article goes on. Liberalism is uniquely vulnerable to internal enemies because it's a form of government defined by its openness, its tolerance for dissent, its respect for and encouragement of different opinions, of essentially pluralism. And that is true. It is characterized by that. But it's not a form of government that's defined by a suicide pact. Its tolerance for dissent, its openness, its respect for pluralism and different opinions doesn't mean that it has to have a respect for sedition. That point has to be made and made again and made again. The article isn't making that point. But this system can only sustain itself if everyone who enjoys these liberal freedoms remains committed to them as a principle that applies equally to all. Well, I deny that too. It's not necessary for everyone to remain committed to them. Probably is necessary for the majority to remain committed to them. Probably is necessary for the people who are leading the majority to remain committed to them and to be willing to deploy the weapons that exist in defending them. Anyway, once some reject that principle of equality, holding, for example, that elections are only valid if they deliver victories to one of the country's two parties, a fundamental problem arises. Well, there's another problem there too. There aren't only two parties in this country. There may only be two major parties, but there are a lot more than two parties in this country. I haven't counted them lately, but there was a graphic on YouTube today which if you click on it shows roughly 20 parties existing. So there are more than two parties. But it is a problem when one of the two major parties seems to be asserting or implying or acting as if the results of elections are only valid if they deliver victories to their own party. And that's something that was also demonstrated by this last election. These Republicans were claiming, actually a majority of the Republicans in the House were claiming that the very same elections that delivered a victory for Joe Biden and also for them in their runs for the House, that their own elections that put them in the House were valid, but that somehow the same election that put Joe Biden into the presidency wasn't valid. Come on, folks. That is simply naked, authoritarian bias That's all that is. If we win, it's valid. If they win, it's not. People who behave in that way are enemies of democracy. That behavior is seditious behavior in itself. You might think that those attempting to defend the system would be justified in excluding those who reject openness, tolerance, and the rules that enable their flourishing. But that very act of exclusion is itself an expression, of illiberalism, which the dissenters will gladly use to accuse the defenders of liberalism of hypocrisy and double standards. Well, I think the dissenters will accuse the defenders, of liberal democracy of hypocrisy and double standards, whatever the defenders of democracy do. But that very act of exclusion is not an expression of illiberalism. I'm sorry. The constitution of a liberal democracy is not a suicide pact. It's not a suicide pact anywhere. There is no obligation to defend the freedom of those who would overthrow a democracy, or to defend their opinions, or to be tolerant of their opinions, or to just treat them as other opinions that are just as good as any other opinions. I keep saying this. I am going to say it again. Democracy is not a suicide pact. When you use free speech to justify and engage in seditious behavior, that is not free speech that is guaranteed by the Constitution. I am sorry. Anyway, the article goes on. That sounds like an accusation made in bad faith, and it likely will be in particular cases, but it is also unfortunately true. A liberal society really does become less liberal as it seeks to curtail the freedoms of those who would destroy it. I'm sorry. I don't agree. It doesn't become less liberal. Why? Because the Constitution is not a suicide pact. Anyway, progressives recognize this tendency. When it was the left that suffered during the Red Scare, the late 1940s and 50s. No, progressives did not recognize this tendency because during the Red Scare, those progressives engaging in free speech were not about trying to overthrow the government. They were not about that. There might have been some very, very small minority in this country that was committed to the overthrow of the government. But the progressives in this country were not committed to the overthrow of the government. And insofar as they were committed to the free speech of the minority, they were only committed to it because that minority was so small that it was not a danger to the country in the late 40s and 50s. I don't recall the communists, for example, or even the fascists in the late 40s and 50s. I never recall them attacking the capital of the United States with thousands of people. That never happened. Boy, there's a lot of nonsense in this article. The philosophy in back of it is very weak. They may be less likely to recognize the problem today when the scrutiny is being directed at Trumpian conservatives, but the problem is the same. No, I don't believe it is. This means that liberal democracy's very efforts to defend itself, to defend itself against its enemies, can weaken it, leading to diverge from its foundational principles and opening it up to justified criticism from the very same people who aim to tear it down. Well, if people believe the framing he's given to this, yes, it certainly can weaken the defenders of democracy. It can weaken them from a political point of view, but it doesn't weaken them from a moral point of view or from an intellectual consistency point of view. Anyway, we can see this dynamic at work today in post-January 6th efforts to take a stand against the right. This includes attempts to ban certain far-right figures from Facebook and Twitter, as well as the act of deplatforming Parler, a social media site that had become a hotbed for right-wing incitement in the weeks that led up to the melee. I think that's the way you pronounce melee. Some have begun to propose going further, using regulatory power to restrict the reach of or even shut down Fox News. Well, I'm sorry again. I hate to say it. I am not for shutting down Fox News, but generally speaking. But if Fox News can be shown to be exhibiting seditious behavior, then I am for shutting it down. Because I don't think that's a restriction of freedom of speech among those who accept the Constitution. As for deplatforming Parler, well, I feel funny about that. I guess I feel funny about it because, as I understand it, there were many groups on Parler that were not engaged in anti-constitutional activity. I can't see why certain people or certain groups couldn't be shut down without shutting down Parler. But I'm not that familiar with Parler. I'm no authority on what was going on there, and what it was doing. What troubles me is that the deplatforming and the actions by Facebook and Twitter, as well, seem to be happening on kind of an ad hoc basis and were carried out by private interests. They were private interests, though, that were using the public airwaves. Frankly, I'm not sure what right the private interests had to shut them down. Now, I know that those are private interests, and those are private companies. And if the infrastructure they used was entirely their infrastructure, and if they were in no way using the airwaves of the public, which I think they are, if they weren't using a platform that was developed and run by the government, yes, the internet. If you remember, the internet started out, as ARPANET. The internet is part of the airwaves, in a sense. The government has the power to regulate those airwaves in the public interest. But the question is, should Facebook and Twitter and Parler and the other platforms operating on the internet, should they have the right to police what is going on? Seems to me the government has the right to police incitement, but I don't see why Facebook and Twitter have the right to do that. Somebody might want to explain that to me. We give far too many rights for private interests using public airwaves. And we seem to be reluctant to give the government the right to defend itself against people who are attempting to violate the Constitution of the United States by inciting violence against the institutions of government in the United States, or even other people, other citizens of the United States. Anyway, less fanciful have been debates about what to do about Donald Trump himself now that he's no longer president. In the days following the insurrection on Capitol Hill, it was reasonable for Twitter and Facebook to ban him. Given the risk of him inciting further acts of violence surrounding the upcoming inauguration of Joe Biden. But what should happen now with Trump a private citizen again? Now, this raises the issue. This raises, a very big issue. What happens when the president of the United States is inciting, an insurrection? And one of the major political parties, in governments, whose members are office holders in the Congress, won't impeach the president for high crimes, and misdemeanors. What happens then? Now that is a weakness in our Constitution. I don't know if it's a weakness we can do anything about, but it's certainly a weakness, because this would-be democracy was incapable of defending itself in that particular situation. There was, of course, the right of the Cabinet of the United States to declare the president as unable to perform his duty to the United States. But the Cabinet was under the thumb of the president. They were afraid of him, and they would not take advantage of that amendment to the Constitution, which was put in order to help to defend the Republic, in case of emergencies. But they would not activate the amendment, in order to do that. They also would not impeach the president. Congress would not. One House of Congress was ready to impeach him, but the other House of Congress was not ready to convict and remove him, from office. Those are problems with the Constitution which we ought to try to fix. But I don't know if there is a fix. The only fix may be the process of politics itself. And we may just have to admit that politics failed us during these Trump years, because someone who was clearly violating the Constitution from the very first day he took office could not be removed from office, because one of our major political parties was so corrupt it would not even consider kicking him out. And the other one was corrupt enough that it did not impeach him. From the first day it took over the House in 2019, even though he was violating the Constitution right then and there, and had been doing so for 2 years prior to their taking over the House of Representatives. We have to face the fact that the threat to our democracy does not just come from the acts of violence, does not just come from Donald Trump, does not just come from those who would follow him anywhere, but it comes from the corruption in our whole system. Why wouldn't the Democrats act to remove Trump, to impeach him, on January 3rd of 2019 when they took over? Because they would have had to impeach him for the kind of corruption that they themselves have been guilty of. And they didn't want to do that. They didn't want to invoke the Emoluments Clause from the first, because the kind of corruption he was engaged in was very like the kind of corruption that they engage in each day. It's a joke right now that our Congress people use their positions in Congress and their inside information and their very acts in Congress to enrich themselves. I mean, that's like a violation of the Emoluments Clause. It's just like it. It's the same kind of corruption. It's them arranging politics and government to benefit themselves and their families. We just had an incident the other day with Nancy Pelosi doing things to favor electric cars while holding financial positions in Tesla stock. We just saw that. It's considered routine. But it's that kind of corruption that led them to fail to try to impeach Trump for violations of the Emoluments Clause. Anyway, the article goes on. What should happen now with Trump a private citizen again? If he remains blocked, he and his supporters will be able to claim that tech companies are unfairly, illiberally, and undemocratically penalizing him and millions of Americans who view him as their tribune. But if these companies relent and allow him to start tweeting again, they've handed the leader of an undemocratic insurrection the means of organizing and leading a new and damaging putsch at some time in the future. But it's not just on these companies. It's not just on these companies. What about the new Attorney General of the United States? What is his obligation to pursue the previous president for crimes he committed while he's in office? What about the Attorney General of the United States repealing the policy of the Justice Department to hold presidents immune from prosecution while they are in office? That's just a policy of the Justice Department. It can be repealed by Merrick Garland. It's not some sacred principle of the Constitution. It's a fairly recent doctrine which has taken shape as the doctrine of impunity for office holders and for the rich and for corporations has gotten more and more popular in our society. So Damon Linker continues, but liberal democracy needs to defend itself against those seeking to do it harm. Yet a country that shuts down media companies and enforces blacklists has an important respect ceased to be liberal. It depends on the details. The devil is in the details about that. Once again, it should be shutting down companies that are committing sedition. It should be enforcing blacklists against those who are seditious, or at least subjecting them to prosecution. Now, it shouldn't be enforcing blacklists where people have not gone through due process. That we need. There's no reason to suspend due process, but we do need the constitutions. We do need the prosecutions, and we do need the due process, which means that liberalism can weaken and even destroy itself in the very act of trying to defend itself. On the other hand, the liberalism that just stands back and upholds its libertarian norms, outsourcing its self-defense to civil society's marketplace of ideas, can be suicidal. And I entirely agree with that. You can't leave things to the marketplace of ideas. The reason why is because that marketplace is very, very easy to subvert. And there are no guarantees in any case that the victors, even in an honest marketplace, will not be those dedicated to overturning the marketplace itself. That's especially so, when liberalism's opponents advance their ideas using an alternative set of facts that's impenetrable to rational criticism because they're based on lies and unfalsifiable conspiracies. Is there a solution to the riddle of liberalism's self-defense? And Linker comes out for a middle road between outright illiberalism and complacent disregard for the threat. Maybe the best that we could hope for, along with efforts to bolster the popularity of politicians and parties who remain committed to liberal democratic institutions and norms. In a recent essay in The Atlantic, Anne Applebaum, whose thinking I normally don't care for, suggests supplementing such efforts with attempts to engage with and de-radicalize those Republicans who have followed Trump down the rabbit hole of lies, conspiracies, and sedition. This would involve trying to change the subject, setting aside political disagreements and disputes in favor of work on common projects to benefit the country and perhaps especially the communities where many of the insurrectionists live. It's unclear how much support there would be for such efforts, either among the radicalized Republicans or among their political opponents. But Applebaum's ideas may nonetheless be the best alternative on offer. Best not only because they're most likely to have a positive effect, but also because they're unlikely to clash with liberal democracy's own highest ideals. So liberal politics only works when all participants freely choose to affirm and abide by liberal norms and rules. Aside from cases of outright law breaking, forcing obedience simply isn't a viable option. That's true. But when there are cases of outright law breaking, then we must deliver justice. We cannot shirk that obligation, that responsibility. Justice must apply to all. So when there's law breaking, there must be prosecutions, which means that we need to embrace and encourage any effort, how much of a long shot it might be, to bring anti-liberal Republicans back into the liberal fold. Okay, to a degree, I can endorse that, as long as we don't allow the lawbreakers to go free. Those who engaged in seditious behavior need to be prosecuted, need to be held accountable. That is of overwhelming importance. So next, piece by William Rivers Pitt. In Truth Out, not a long piece, but a good rant. It's entitled, "Stop Trying to Make This About the Unity," quote unquote. There's no uniting with fascists. And I'm afraid I agree with that too. And there's McCarthy advocating for uniting with fascists, just forgetting about it and going forward. On Thursday, House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy winged his way down to Mar-a-Lago, America's newest Superfund site, to kiss the ring of a vanquished would-be king. Kevin McCarthy was there to plead for forgiveness. You see, 3 weeks and apparently 10 million years ago, when Congress people like Kevin McCarthy were running for their lives in the Capitol building under violent siege by Trump voters, remember, the minority leader summoned the will to blame Donald Trump for his outsized role in inciting the mob. One fellow GOP House leader, Liz Cheney, went farther and actually voted to impeach when provided the opportunity, even as then Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell made definitive noises to the effect that being rid of Trump would be advantageous to all. For a brief moment, it seemed possible that the Republican Party would pull up and out of the political gravity well they had created by empowering and protecting Trump's monstrous administration. They would break free, take their chances with Trump's violent base, and then dance like Smeagol after the shunning of the Gollum. Quote, "Gone, gone, gone. Smeagol is free," unquote. Trump, sensing slippage in his stranglehold over the GOP, responded immediately with threats to split the GOP by starting his own party, the Patriot Party. This threat was ostensibly made to warn Republican senators not to vote against him in the impeachment trial, but it was also a warning to the wider party at the state and local level. "I will crack this party like an egg," was the message, "unless I get everything I want." Something in that nebulous struggle for control, something enormous, shifted. On Tuesday, Rand Paul turned a procedural vote on the upcoming impeachment trial into a litmus test for who in that chamber was brave enough to defy Trump. A meager 5 GOP senators rose to support the trial, while the remaining 45, including Rand Paul, chose to lager in Trump's camp. It was a seismic vote that altered the political landscape overnight. By Wednesday morning, the situation had gained grim clarity. Quote, the nation's two most powerful elected Republicans have signaled that they are ready to pass questions of responsibility for the violent effort to overturn the result of the presidential election, unquote, reported the Washington Post that day. And quote again, an attempt that left a Capitol police officer and 4 rioters dead as they maneuvered to avoid a divisive battle within the Republican Party and try to position it to reclaim power in 2022. By the way, since that time, a second Capitol police officer is dead, this time from suicide, evidently a side effect of the failed attempt to defend the Capitol against those who wanted to sack it. Republican National Committee Chairwoman, specifically Ronna McDaniel, a Trump devotee, put out a statement after the Paul vote. Quote, not only is this impeachment a distraction from the important issues America wants Congress focused on, it is unconstitutional, and I join the vast majority of Senate Republicans in opposing it, as Democrats continue to sow division and obstruct. Republicans will keep fighting for the American people, unquote. As Democrats continue to sow division and obstruct, quote unquote, the irony fairly sees. We seek unity, which means do as we say, and if you don't, here are these violent followers of ours who are liable to do anything. When they show up, it is your fault because you are sowing division. This is the base tactical logic, quote unquote, of fascism. The use of language against itself. It is not supposed to make sense. It is supposed to intimidate. In Oregon, the state's GOP leadership issued a statement claiming that the sacking of the Capitol had been a staged, quote, false flag, unquote, event. The Arizona GOP censured that state's Republican governor for refusing to overturn the election results. Domino after domino began to fall. And in every instance, Trump became that much more unbound by Promethean in his wrath, and once again the center of attention. By the end of the week, the deal had gone down. Congress was in chaos, with Democratic members fearing to be in the same room with GOP colleagues who had openly cheered for their assassinations beneath the Capitol dome. A few moderate, quote-unquote, Democrats cooed about moving on, quote-unquote, even as whole swaths of House and Senate Democrats were aghast at the capitulation they were witnessing. Under the leadership of Donald Trump, the GOP had lost the House, Senate, and White House, watched idly as hundreds of thousands of people died in a pandemic, 450,000 and counting, that could have been contained with a bare modicum of competence, and watched again as a sitting president exhorted an angry mob to smash their way into the seat of Congress so they could kill the leadership of same. This incredible totality of disgrace and infamy, in the end, was not enough to inspire a final break from the author of all this misery. Kevin McCarthy's obsequious journey to Mar-a-Lago was the final penny to drop. The GOP civil war is over for now, and Trump remains the core power within the Republican Party. The QAnon devotee, Marjorie Taylor Greene, and her ilk are the new face of the party. There is video of Greene harassing a survivor of the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas high school massacre. She accused him of being part of a staged event. Today, she sits on the House Education and Labor Committee, an insult stacked upon an insult. Her party lacks the courage to expel her, and she knows it because she rolls with Donald Trump. Now and for the foreseeable future, so do they all. There is an old saying, if there are 11 people seated at a dinner table with a fascist, and none of them are denouncing the fascist, there are 12 fascists at that table. That is the Republican Party in a nutshell. There is no cooperating with this mayhem. There is no trying to get along, offering concessions, or searching for bipartisanship. President Biden has strongly signaled his desire for Congress to settle this matter rapidly. Democratic Senator Tim Kaine wants to cut a deal to censure Trump that Republicans can agree to. GOP Senator John Cornyn of Texas, in reply, pushed back on both impeachment and censure in perfect Republican doublespeak. Quote, I would encourage people to move on rather than live in the past. Unquote. Let it never be said that these people are anything other than seamlessly true to form. The Benghazi attack earned years of congressional GOP hearings and investigations, as did Hillary Clinton's emails. A frontal assault on the very home of American democracy by Republican Trump supporters. It's time to stop living in the past. Next up, the GOP deficit hawks with 5 verses and a chorus on fiscal responsibility. Their greatest strength is their lack of shame. The Republican Party today is about one thing, using democracy to destroy democracy, and all in the name of their thwarted, autocratic leader. They don't want to make deals. They want to take, and that is all. You don't make deals with that if you are the Democrats. You defeat it, using the majority's millions of voters and grassroots activists labored to provide you. You pass legislation by hook or by crook that improves people's lives, whether they want it or not. FDR's Tennessee Valley Authority program is instructive. You win, make things better for people, and wait for the light bulb for that moment to arrive. Today's GOP is a beast. You do not but negotiate with rabid dogs. You are a damn fool if you try. That was, in my view, a perfect rant and the epitome of wisdom. Stop trying to negotiate with these fascist crackpots. Crush them, get the laws we need passed, and wait for that moment of the light bulb to arrive. It will, but you need to have the courage to act. Now, let's get to the relatively good things. First, there's a post by Bill McKibben, which originally appeared in the New Yorker. I picked it up at Readers Supported News. Bill had something to cheer about. Of course, he's the well-known environmentalist. The Biden administration's landmark day in the climate fight. Did this on January 29th, 2021. And he says, January 27th was the most remarkable day in the history of America's official response to the climate crisis. At least since that June afternoon in 1988 when NASA's James Hansen told a congressional committee that the planet had begun to heat. On Wednesday, in the course of a few hours, the Biden administration took a series of coordinated actions that, considered together, may well mark the official beginning of the end of the fossil fuel era. I hope that Bill is right. I sincerely hope that January 27th was that kind of day. Going on with what Bill has to say. The Biden administration temporarily paused the new leasing of federal lands and waters for fossil fuel production, while speeding up the process of permitting renewables. The president pledged that the federal government would start buying electric cars in volume. His order sets up or strengthens offices in the Justice Department, the Energy Department, and the Environmental Protection Agency to focus on what he called, quote, environmental justice, unquote. He announced that climate change would become a national security priority for the Pentagon. And all of this came after his earlier pledges to rejoin the Paris Climate Accord and to cancel the Keystone XL pipeline. There's a shock and awe feel to the barrage of actions, and that is the point taken together. They send a decisive signal about the end of one epoch and the beginning of another. And that signal, most of all, is aimed at investors' fossil fuel. Biden is making clear, is not a safe bet or even a good bet for making real money. Coal, oil, and gas are the past, not the future. They're the present too, of course, but you don't make big money bets on the present. We may not get to that future fast enough to stave off truly disastrous global warming. The natural world made some announcements of its own this week, including the news that the melt from glaciers and ice sheets is in line with the worst-case scenario that scientists have produced. And we won't get to that safe future easily. The fossil fuel industry is already hitting back hard against the Biden announcements, using the only argument it has left, jobs. By the way, and this added to Bill's article, if that's the only argument it has left is jobs, the answer to that is the Job Guarantee Program for the federal government. Let's get that through Congress as part of the reconciliation bill. Federal job guarantee for anybody who wants one at a living wage, cost adjusted in every area of the United States. Cost adjusted. So it's in accord with the costs individuals experience in the areas where they live. Jobs in the places where they live for all of them at a decent living wage with good fringe benefits. But the administration's team was prepared for the onslaught. Biden styled his announcements as a job creation scheme, predicting, for instance, that electric cars would create 1 million new jobs for auto workers. And his aides made clear that they understood the need to cushion the blow in areas where oil, gas, and coal jobs are disappearing. Quote, we're going to make sure nobody is left behind, unquote. The domestic client czar, Gina McCarthy, said to reporters. Quote again, we need to put people to work in their own communities. That's where their home is. That's where the vision is. So we are creatively looking at those opportunities for investment so that we can get people understanding that we're not trying to take away jobs. Again, the job guarantee is the proper response to this. I remind everybody that even though he did not write a book about the MMT job guarantee, Council of Economic Advisors members in the administration, the Biden administration, Jared Bernstein, wrote a book with Dean Baker on the job guarantee for the federal government. Now, in that book, he did not advocate for a living wage for the job guarantee jobs. But we can do that. He's there to advocate for the job guarantee. We're here to advocate for a living wage in every community in the United States. The difference between these actions and the responses of previous administrations is that Biden isn't hedging his bets. Boy, I hope Bill McKibben is right about that. Probably the day's most important development was the least remarked upon. The White House made clear that America would stop letting public funds from agencies such as the Export-Import Bank flow to fossil fuels, that it would use its leverage at the World Bank and the IMF to support the goals of the Paris Accord. And then, crucially, John Kerry, who was coordinating the administration's global climate policy, made clear in a speech to virtual Davos that this dictum applied to natural gas. Quote, the problem with gas is if we build out a huge infrastructure for gas now to continue to use it as the bridge fuel when we haven't really exhausted the other possibilities, we're going to be stuck with stranded assets in 10, 20, 30 years, unquote, he said. And quote again, gas is primarily methane, and we have a huge methane problem, folks, unquote. This statement is enormously important because gas has always been the Democratic Party's climate vice. The Obama administration was willing to take on filthy coal, but little to rein in fracking for gas. Kerry's predecessor, Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, started a program in the State Department to encourage fracking abroad. It was that administration's concession to the power of the fossil fuel industry, which has wagered much of its future on gas. Since coal is in terminal decline, and oil will see a slow but steady fall as the world electrifies its vehicle fleets, frack gas was the last chance for real growth for the fossil majors. What Kerry is trying to do is foreclose that gas boom, and it's likely to work. If you want a straw in the wind, consider the career of Heather Zishal, whose job put her at the center of the Obama administration's gas plan, and who for a period after that administration left office, served on the board of one of the nation's largest liquefied natural gas exporters. Now she's the head of a new lobby called the American Clean Power Association, and on Wednesday she gave unflinching backing to the Biden plan. If we're going to remove 51 billion tons of greenhouse gas emissions annually and get to zero emissions in 30 years, she told the Washington Post, this is going to require drastic action. Her members, she said, are prepared to invest $1 trillion in the coming years on clean energy projects. Quote, we see nothing but opportunity, unquote. And the fossil fuel firms see nothing but trouble. Liam Denning, who edited the Herd on the Street column for the Wall Street Journal and wrote the Lex column for the Financial Times, explained yesterday for Bloomberg that two of the climate movement strategies for cutting off financial support for oil and gas are delay and doubt. He said, the first erodes an investment's value while the magic of the time value, via the magic of the time value of money. The second does it by raising the cost of capital going in. If something looks riskier, it must clear a higher hurdle before anyone cuts a check to finance it. By yesterday's announcements, quote, effectively cast a pall over the longer-term cash flows from oil and gas investments after a decade defined by easy financing and the safe assumption of continued growth. The past week's politics reaffirm the 2020's present a far murkier prospect for oil and gas. Capital markets will price accordingly and thereby shape the outcome, unquote. The climate fight is far from over. Battles with the fossil fuel industry will continue for the foreseeable future, and the outcome will determine the pace of the transition toward clean energy. Keep an eye on the fate of the Dakota Access Pipeline and the Line 3 tar sands pipeline, which is in the state, which is in Minnesota. The new administration's climate logic should mean their cancellation, but it would be a heavy political lift. But this week's actions mark an unmistakable turning point. The climate movement has finally shifted the zeitgeist far enough for an administration to act decisively, and Joe Biden has risen to the moment. Boy, would I love to believe all this. However, my mind is open to the possibility that Bill McKibben is right. Okay, another piece of good news, this time from Dave Dayen. Or I don't know if it's good news, but it's news. It's news about activity, specifically that Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer isn't waiting around for Republicans. And what Dave says, let me share this. What Dave has to say about this is, let's see. The fate of Biden's first and most important legislative priority looks like it will become an all-Democratic affair. After some discussions yesterday, Democrats are ready to take the first steps to use the budget reconciliation process to pass the $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan. That begins with passing a budget resolution through the House and Senate, which will happen as soon as Tuesday, a congressional source tells me. Once the budget resolution for fiscal year 2021 passes through both houses of Congress with specific reconciliation structures, then a reconciliation bill can be readied. It does look like that bill will be set at the $1.9 trillion level. As Lindsay Owens of the Groundwork the Collaborative explains, that means that any amendments that cost money will take the bill over that limit and force some bargaining over what to keep in or take out. There are some mitigating factors I'll explain in a separate post, but it would be better to write in some flexibility there. That's a minor issue, however. The big thing here is Democrats want to retain the size of the package and have the threat of going it alone available. They might put the full bill on the floor for Republicans to reject, but at that point, reconciliation will take over. In theory, that forces the Republicans to the table if they want to have any say over the bill. In practice, I think it means you just get a reconciliation package, but Democrats aren't wasting their time on bipartisanship. which is a sea change. It does not look like the bill will be split at the White House's request, meaning the checks and shots strategy is dead, unfortunately, I'm afraid. But Dave says, it was my strategy. So, of course, I think this is a mistake, as do I, because I really like the strategy. But it was going on a bad trajectory anyway. The Republicans and some Democrats were looking to nickel and dime the checks, bringing eligibility down to individuals making under $50,000 per year, $75,000 for couples. Even the vaccine money was said to be on the way to being crushed down. The checks and shots strategy doesn't mean little checks and fewer shots. It means daring Republicans to vote down popular bills they've previously supported. So at this point, it may be that reconciliation is a safer ground. However, it's a much more lengthy process. Once you get the budget resolution done, hopefully smoothly, you have to write the reconciliation package. And with Biden determined to give the bipartisanship a chance, oh God, I thought we just said he gave up bipartisanship. You have to put the full bill to a vote to see what it can garner. Then reconciliation itself is a protracted process in the Senate with a vote-a-rama that could lead to dozens, if not hundreds, of short votes. There could be as many as 1,000 amendments introduced. And after the amendment process, you have to reconcile the reconciliation bill, meaning you have to make sure the Senate's bill matches the House. Through all of that, there are going to be negotiations, as literally every senator will be in the position to make demands on the bill. Not to mention every small group of House members, given the narrow Democratic majority there. So progressives are talking about recurring stimulus checks, for example, rather than another one-time check. The sort of deadline is when extended unemployment expires in mid-March. Obviously, Democrats would like to pass something before then, but I don't think that's going to be all that possible. The main cost of reconciliation is time. We need the vaccines out as fast as humanly possible, as we're in a race with the more contagious variants. And then he has a link to Ezra Klein on that. But delaying the money needed to rally to really ramp up the distribution is unconscionable. And this really puts out to dry the Georgia senators who won Democrats back the majority. They finally spoke up yesterday, arguing that they made a distinct process on the checks that needed to be honored quickly. It could be that March is good enough for them, but you can sense the discomfort. If checks and shots hit the floor next week, along with the resolution for the budget, in a way that forced the Republicans to go on record against very popular programs they themselves have said they support, that would be politically valuable whether Republicans block them or not. The policy value of passage is significant, especially on the vaccine side, where even red state governors are begging for more support. Checks and shots appear dead, but the idea was never taken in the proper spirit anyway. But make your opponent take a tough vote. Why else hold the majority? Asks Dave Dayen. So, okay, Dave also had some comments about the new Johnson & Johnson vaccine. I've mentioned everything there. Johnson & Johnson expects 30 million doses, by April. So that's 10% of the population that could get the one-dose shot. It really helps with the supply snag. So that's good news from that particular point of view. The better results in the U.S. argue for faster approval here before the variants take hold. The South African variant has been found in the U.S., but it's not yet dominant. Of course, Only 2 cases so far. Getting people inoculated now would reduce the worst effects of that changeover and potentially prevent the mutants from becoming dominant in the United States. Johnson & Johnson will apparently file for emergency use authorization next week. Dave says, how about today? So I still have one thing that I want to cover. Let me take a look at it and see if I really need to do it, because we're already at 10:30 now as a result of my ranting about how to defend a liberal democracy, which of course we're not even very much of a liberal democracy anymore. But in any case, okay, this article from Truthout is about the economic plan, of Joe Biden, the $1.9 trillion economic plan. Title of the article is Biden's $1.9 trillion stimulus is a vital beginning for a new Deal. I noticed they said a new Deal and not a Green New Deal. This is by C.J. Polychronu from Truthout, done on January 29th. It's transcript from an interview he did with Robert Pollin and Gerald Epstein, co-directors of the Political Economy Research Institute at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst, and he asked them a bunch of questions concerning the economic plan. I'm just going to leaf through and only give you the most important parts. The most important part, their answers. One important part, which you probably have not heard about, is that their major support for state and local governments that are right now staring collectively at budget deficits of $500 billion, or more, which of course state and local governments are not allowed to run, so they be forced to cut people. Anyway, going further, the total package amounts to about 9% of the economy's overall level of activity, of the GDP. This proposed Biden stimulus would be on top of the $900 billion that just was passed, equal to 4% of GDP, as well as the $2 trillion package, equal to 2% of GDP that was implemented last March. So if the Biden proposal passes, it would mean over the past 10 months, the federal government stimulus would add up to roughly 23% of GDP. Now that's a stimulus. And on top of that, since March, the Federal Reserve has purchased over $3 trillion in bonds, a 74% increase over their holdings as of last February. They bought the $3 trillion from Wall Street firms to bail them out and to keep pushing interest rates down on home mortgages, on business loans, and on government bonds. If the Biden proposal passes, then this would amount, including the Fed's help, to more than 1/3 of total GDP. That's historically unprecedented during peacetime. The only comparable level of intervention by the government was during the Second World War, when government deficit spending reached as high as 25% of GDP. But of course, that spending was focused on fighting a world war. Their point, though, actually Pollin's point, since he's answering this, is that this level of public spending included in the Biden proposal is absolutely necessary, and for that matter, will not be sufficient given the severity of the current crisis. Over the past 9 months, 74 million people have filed to receive unemployment insurance. This is equal to fully 45% of the labor force of the United States. As of the most recent data, nearly 20% of all households with children report that their families didn't have enough to eat over the past week. That figure rises to 24% of African American households. Similarly, 26% of households with children report they're unable to keep up with their rent. In the middle of all this, the Dow Jones Industrial Stock Market Index is up an incredible 68% since the initial stimulus program passed in March, thanks to both the stimulus and the bailout by the Fed having successfully propped up Wall Street. But they were asked, how does Biden's plan compare to the Green New Deal, especially the version of a green economy you have been fighting for over a decade now? Pollan said the combined government spending injections since last March, totaling to roughly 1/3 of all spending in the economy if the current bill passes, don't include a single dime to address the climate crisis. Not a single dime. This is while we now know that 2020 was the second hottest year on record. Biden has emphasized he's going to take major action to address the climate crisis. Specifically, he said he will introduce a public investment-led program soon that will be over and above the short-term stimulus measure to fight COVID and the ongoing recession. So, another big bill coming after the $1.9 trillion bill. That big bill is about the climate crisis. Good news. On Wednesday, Biden signed a series of executive orders that will, among other things, suspend oil and gas leasing on federal government lands, transition the federal government stock of automobile and trucks to an all-electric fleet, and create an environmental justice commitment in federal policies that will address disproportionate health, environmental, economic, and climate impacts on disadvantaged communities. Most broadly, Biden's climate directive commits his administration to move the U.S. onto an irreversible path to a net zero economy by 2050. Well, obviously, try 2030 is my comment about that. Nevertheless, for the most part, Biden has still not laid out his full-scale program for achieving the net zero emissions goal. For now, we still need to look at what Biden proposed during the presidential campaign as a guide. That included both some positive as well as seriously negative points. On the positive side, the overall overall level of investment spending that Biden has proposed to deliver zero emissions economy by 2050 is in broad alignment with what I, as well as other research, have suggested is necessary. That is about 2 to 3% of GDP every year until we have built a clean energy infrastructure in the United States, as well as contributed in a major way to building it in the rest of the world. For the next couple of years, that would mean $400 billion per year in investments in the United States alone, including from both private as well as public sources. That, my friends, is too little. But Bernie Sanders wanted in his platform $1.6 trillion a year invested. The $400 billion a year only scratches the surface. It's not enough at all. Barely a beginning. Biden's campaign proposal did also recognize building a clean energy economy will be a major new source of job creation throughout the economy for people working in all kinds of jobs. He also emphasized labor unions are going to need to play a major role ensuring the jobs that are generated will be good quality jobs with decent wages, benefits, and working conditions. But Biden and the federal government can already play a role in that by making sure that wages paid by the federal government are at a living wage all over the country. So he's got to do that. Finally, Biden's campaign proposal did include just transition policies to support the workers as well as their families and communities. And then they say, so far, so good. On the downside, the Biden campaign proposal gives high priority to so-called carbon capture technology and nuclear energy as major new sources of zero emissions energy supply. Why is that? Because, of course, the Biden administration, the Biden campaign were captured by the donors. And carbon capture technology is something they want to invest in because that requires very large companies to administer and to keep going, and gives the powers of today something to do in the future. And that same is true, with nuclear energy. The same kinds of companies that are now dealing in fossil fuels and things like that have always favored that source of energy, nuclear energy, because they had the money to invest in those plants. Under carbon capture technology, we keep earning, and they talk about that some. Fossil fuel companies, the carbon capture technology would literally entail capturing the carbon before it enters the atmosphere and transporting it into gigantic underground storage areas to presumably remain there for all time. The fossil fuel companies love this idea since it keeps them in business. But at best, the technology remains unproven at commercial scale despite decades of trying by the companies who desperately want it to work. Also, nuclear energy presents huge public safety problems as well as being very expensive, despite having operated as an electricity source for 60 years now. Parlin says, we need to insist the centerpiece of the Biden climate program be investments to dramatically expand the supply of clean, renewable energy sources, including solar, wind, geothermal, small-scale hydro, and low-emissions bioenergy, along with investments to dramatically raise energy efficiency standards with public transportation, electric vehicles running on renewable energy, and net zero energy buildings. That is the cheapest, cleanest, and safest way to deliver a zero emissions economy, and to do so in a way that greatly expands job opportunities. And then in the interview, there was a question for Jerry. That question was about the debt, and that, in a recent speech, Treasury Secretary Yellen played down, the debt issue. Sorry, this is in our confirmation hearings. The question is there a need to be worried about the size of the debt, the deficits? And Gerald Epstein says, rich countries, especially those like the United States, that can easily borrow at home and abroad, in its own currency. And he says the U.S. dollar is the main global currency, have a great deal of capacity to borrow for public spending. It's especially true when the cost of borrowing is well below the likely return on investment, as measured, for example, by the rate of growth of the economy. And now U.S. interest rates on government debt is at historically low levels, below 1% in many cases. Of course, since Gerald Epstein is not an MMTer, he fails to mention that the interest rates on government debt, that is a policy variable that can be manipulated by the government, and that can be kept as low as the government wants, even at zero, if it wants, forever. And since he's not, an MMTer, he doesn't answer the question, by saying that actually the government doesn't even have to issue any debt. It can simply create, the necessary currency to pay all its bills, and it can do that through overt congressional financing or through using platinum coin seigniorage. Anyway, Keynesian and progressive economists have long understood this fact, but, says Epstein, but it has taken two major economic crises in the span of little more than a decade to convince even centrist and liberal economists and democratic policymakers of this truth. Of course, Republicans, at least since Reagan, have understood that when they are in power, they should have the government borrow a lot to fund tax cuts for the wealthy and subsidies for their pet constituencies, and then they should become austerity hawks when the Democrats are in power to block their initiatives and popularity. And of course, true to form, that is what Senator McConnell and Republicans are doing now with respect to Biden's spending initiatives. And as usual, some of the right-wing Democrats are parroting these Republican talking points. It is important to note that this capacity to run deficits and borrow is not absolute. It is best to be used to help achieve full employment, to deal, well, actually, it actually is absolute. The power to run deficits is absolute for a monetary sovereign such as the United States, even though Gerald Epstein doesn't believe that. It is best to be used to help achieve full employment, to deal with national health and other emergencies, to invest in green transformation and positive support for the poor, people of color, and working class. And it is many of these targets that the Biden administration and Democratic leadership in Congress are trying to reach with their spending initiatives. Anyway, he talks more about the folly of deficit phobia. He says, but looking ahead, the CBO projects that even if the interest rates go up by more than they expect, net interest payments as a percent of GDP will go up less than 3%, the Reagan average. And if interest rates stay where they are now, then government interest rates will fall to only 1% of GDP, despite a continued increase in the borrowing, of the government, which again, as I said, it's a policy variable that's controlled by the Federal Reserve and by the Treasury Department, collaborating with each other to keep those interest rates low. So Gerald Epstein talks more. Talks about the increase in the Fed's portfolio, and criticizes the Fed for being much stingier with the support of state, and local government, where it set interest rate terms so high that very few actually borrowed. He says the Fed should continue to work cooperatively with Biden administration's fiscal policy. He said this cooperation is likely to be enhanced, with Yellen, the former chair of the Fed, as the Treasury Secretary. But he says, in addition, the Fed should revive the special facilities such as the state, and the state, and the city lending facilities and the small business lending facility, and make the terms easier for state, and local. The Fed doesn't need to revive, the lending facility. It already has the authority under Section 14, but Section 14, the Fed Act, to act, to supply state and local governments, with whatever short-term lending they need at whatever interest rate they choose to impose. It can be very close to zero, and the short-term lending can be rolled over every 3 months, if necessary, for 20 to 30 years. To give the states and local governments plenty of time to pay back the huge loans, they might want to take. So they don't even have to revive the lending facility, as we've covered here in previous live streams. So that's all I'm going to say about this last piece, except it, of course, is very optimistic, and in general in line with policies that I think the Biden administration ought to follow. There's some comments on Dodd-Frank here, and the importance of imposing capital requirements on banks in order to create the stability we need, and also the need to create a level playing field for community oriented banks and publicly oriented banks and publicly owned banks. And let's see, is there a mention of postal banks here? I didn't see any mention, of postal banks here. unfortunately, there's a mention of the first order of business must be to clear out the regulatory agencies of big bank, hired guns, and Trump administration lackeys, and replace them with competent, progressive leaders and members of the key financial regulatory agencies, including the SEC, the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, the CFTC, that is, and the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, the OCC, the CFPB, the Consumer Financial Protection Board, that is, and the Federal Reserve. So far, the Biden administration is indicating a mixed start in this regard. Biden has nominated Gary Gensler, former Goldman Sachs banker turned tough financial regulator who had been the head of the CFTC under Obama. And he says he's also nominated Rohit Chopra, who helped Senator Warren set up the CFPB and is aligned with her policies to be the head of the CFPB. On the other hand, he's rumored to be considering former Obama official Michael S. Barr to head up the key regulatory agency, the OCC, one of the most powerful of the regulatory agencies, and he needs to do something different there. And he goes on, in this vein, talking about the past and the need for change. Then one final question for both of you. How can progressives ensure that Biden puts an end to business as usual, which was the Obama administration's strategy and may have indeed been responsible for the rise of Donald Trump to power? Collins says, but nothing can be assured. But we can be almost certain that the Biden administration could very easily lapse into the Clintonite, the neoliberal pattern of allowing big capital, including Wall Street and the fossil fuel corporate giants, to call the shots. The only way to prevent that and to enact truly transformative, progressive economic programs will be about for progressives to fight very hard for them right now, and in the coming months. Epstein basically echoed the same thing. And that's it, for that piece. So obviously these people are very much in favor of the $1.9 trillion stimulus program and are calling for strong political support for the program. And they also give a very good discussion of some of the economic aspects of the possible results that would come from the $1.9 trillion stimulus bill, which I guess will not just be a survival bill, but actually be a stimulus bill. Okay, so that's it. I'm going to your comments now. Thank you for staying. Glad you were patient and you were still here. I'll go back to the beginning and consider your comments. There are the rounds of highs. Badia Swift says, oh my God, that's incomprehensible. What's that? Deborah says, I support Truth Out. Kay says, the internet keeps going out again. And Dia says, I wonder if the J&J vaccine has ivermectin in it. No, I don't believe it has. I believe the J&J vaccine is based on an adenocold virus, which is another coronavirus. And it has the capability of interfering with the operation of the proteins that are on the coronavirus, the spike proteins. Okay, it evidently interferes with them, okay, and stops them from allowing, okay, the coronavirus to let in. I guess it stops, but stops the receptors on the coronavirus, okay, from working. Okay, it allows the immune system to block the activities of the spike proteins. So that's how it works. Ivermectin, as I understand it, is strictly on the curative side and is not a therapy that actually prevents the illness. Okay, and Dia says, I dreamed about Bernie last night. He killed a black snake that bit him with a flamethrower. The bite was ineffective because Bernie fried the snake into a crispy critter in 1 second. That's a very vivid dream, Dia Swift. Steve Wolpern says, shared, and Dia says, I really hope that BLM gets that Nobel Peace Prize. Aha! On the dream, says Lana, and she agrees on BLM potential Peace Prize. As do I. Thanks, Lana. I felt so protected after that dream, like it was some omen. Yes, I do hope the BLM wins. It will send the racists a worldwide message. Only trouble is they don't listen to worldwide messages. That's the only trouble. But yeah, I'm for it too. Kay says, still trying to get used to these new glasses, laugh out loud. I don't even recognize myself in the mirror. So glad to see you again, though. Glad you got your new glasses, Kay. Steve says, are they transitional? And this was, Gates went to Wyoming and stirred the lunatics' nest again, successfully. The hardliners' fascist drive is still proceeding. I know it is. In fact, I thought of Gates as being one of those who should be put behind bars for sedition. But I don't really know enough about exactly what he says, whether it could be classified as being seditious activity. Kay says, but what does that mean? Steve says trifocals. Kay says, I have bifocals. Dee says, one thing that can be done is to get the supremacists out of the FBI, law enforcement, and judicial system. Yes, but that's going to be a hard thing, I think, for Biden to root them out because they're probably in every corner of those institutions. Steve Gonzo says, Trump's going to be the first impeached president to ask for a public defender. And Steve Wolfman said, Kay, did you get the blue light protection? Is there a purple tint that protects against screen usage? And Dia says, that liberals should not be synonymous with doormats. Yeah, you know, liberals back in the 1960s, in the 50s, did not used to be synonymous with doormats. That's a relatively recent occurrence. Only came about actually just a little before the Reagan administration, when they gave up calling themselves liberals and decided to be progressives instead. It's not that that's what made them decide to be doormats, but them changing their label was part of their becoming doormats, of their being doormats. Kay says, no, I didn't. Just from America's Best, Steve Wolfbread said, is there a line in your bifocals? If not, they are transitional. And Kay says, no line. Steve says, take some time to get used to them. Kay says, I haven't had an exam in close to 15 or 20 years. I'll laugh out loud. Kay says, we really need single payer. I know. Steve says, consult a professional. I think Bernie's going to try to smuggle single payer into the relief bill. And they need Bernie for that because I don't think they can do a reconciliation bill without Bernie. Steve says consult a professional. Dia says we need a resolution to expel Marjorie Taylor Greene from the House to be introduced on Monday. CBS reports. Good, that needs to be introduced on Monday. But there needs to be a majority to pass it, to pass the resolution. Steve says they can say every year now. Kay says, well, depends on if I can afford to do it. And Dia says there's also a vaccine coming called Novavax, 89.3% efficiency. Yes, I know, of the Novavax vaccine. It had 89.3% of efficacy in the United Kingdom. As far as I know, it has not been tested here yet. But that's encouraging because if it was tested there, it was tested on people who have the B.1.1.7 variant. And if it was 89.3 efficacy against that, it appears to be a very, very good vaccine. And yes, it will be coming online soon. They'll be seeking authorization from the FDA soon. I have no idea what their manufacturing capacity is, though, Novavax. So that's a different kettle of fish. Kay says, this country is so corrupt now, no one knows what will happen tomorrow. Steve Gonzo says, I should probably check the topic before I comment or laugh out loud. Steve Wilprin said, I'm surprised they didn't offer you the blue light protection. You will notice a purple glint in people's new glasses. At least you got an up-to-date prescription. Kay says, I already had to pay over $300 for an exam and 2 pairs of plastic glasses. They didn't take either Medicare or Medicaid. But I had that $600 and had to spend it, so I did. Okay, Andy Swift said, by Representative Stephen Lynch, I'm a Democrat of Massachusetts, tested positive on Friday. Now, you know what they really need to do? They need to expel all the Republicans in the Congress who are refusing to wear masks, because that is what's causing the spread of COVID-19 in the Congress. Those people unwilling to wear masks are dangerous to their fellow Congresspeople, and they need to be expelled for it. That's an attack on the Congress, as much as the attacks by the protesters were a few weeks ago. Lana says, I saw a Twitter or FB post that Congress has exempted themselves from insider trading laws. Yeah, I know they have. I know they have. We need to put in new Congresspeople who will vote not to exempt themselves from insider trading laws. Steve Wilprin said, I can always help you in a pinch. I'm not wealthy, but I'm not suffering. Or we could do a GoFundMe. Dia Swift says, Lindsey Graham has warned against following a QAnon shaman, horny guy, to testify at Trump's impeachment. By what the fuck? How is that up to Lindsey? It's not up to Lindsey. He can't stop the appearance, of the QAnon shaman, horny guy. And Kay says, thank you, Steve. I appreciate that. But I have this pair and spare now, so I'm good for now. Steve Gonzo says, Baroque Khanna being uninsured is deadly. 26,000 people die every year on average because they don't have health insurance. No, Steve, it's a lot more than 26,000 now. It was 26,000 when was it 26,000? Well, first of all, it was never 26,000. There were, at the height of the Affordable Care Act, there were 27,000 people that did not have health insurance. That has now gone up considerably due to COVID. We're probably up to somewhere close to 45 million people who are uninsured right now. And the ratio is okay, I'm sorry, there are 27 million people, okay, who are uncovered at the height, okay, of the Affordable Care Act. There are now close to 45 million people who are uncovered. If you want to find out how many people die, divide that 45 million number by 700, okay, and 86. Okay. And you will find how many people have died. It must be somewhere 55 to 60,000 people at this point who are dying each year because they don't have health insurance. Yeah, that was without a pandemic. But that 27 million people, okay, who were uncovered, that was roughly 33,000 people who were dying each year on the average. See my paper on my website on this in order to get the 1 out of 786 number. Okay. K. Clark Ryan says, yes, it sure is, Steve. Steve Gonzo said, I think it's more like 70,000. Yep. And Kay says, everything is so expensive, it's ridiculous. And Dia says, Trump's top impeachment lawyer has left his team on Politico. That's good. Steve Wolfbrand says, I got new glasses from Costco. Very good price, service, and product. Kay says, now if I can get my teeth fixed, laugh out loud. Steve Wolfbrand says, me too, laugh out loud. And me too, laugh out loud. And I think that Bonnie needs some work on hers. Also, Dia Swift says, by UK applying to join the Asia Pacific Free Trade Pact, the CPTPP, yeah, is right. It's going to compromise the monetary sovereignty, okay, of the United Kingdom. I have a chapter in my book on the TPP, okay, about that. It's also going to compromise the kind of legislation they'll be able to put through in order to protect their populations. Leanne Williamson, hi Leanne, says, and lower quality. Steve Wolfbrand said, suicide is rampant. And Kay says, yes, Leanne, way lower quality. Evelina Pons says, got it. Thank you, Kay. Nice to see you, Evelina. And Leanne Williamson says, it's pitiful. They've raised prices and lowered quantity and quality. Kay says, yep, I used to work in healthcare when it was nonprofit, so I've watched it go to hell and see it better than others. Leanne and Deborah Wilson says, the Democrats are not our saving grace. Sorry. Yeah, I mean, I agree they're not our saving grace. But if they don't turn out to be our saving grace, I'm afraid we're not going to be survived because we have them in the presidency at least until 2025. Okay. If they do a good job, it'll be longer than that. If they don't do a good job, it'll be even worse because then the people who come back into the presidency are going to be total deniers of the climate crisis. So, even though the Democrats most probably won't be our saving grace, we're still going to have to make them be our saving grace if we possibly can, because if we don't do that, then we won't survive. Evelina says already enough by Republicans in the Democratic Party. What do they need? A party apart? Laugh out loud. And Lana says, very well said, especially at the end of that last article. Deborah says, it sure was a rant. Dems used the Repub for cover for their purposeful lack of action. You bet. And Lana says, did you see that Gates and Liz Cheney have a hunting date? Irony much? Haha. Not only would that be irony much, I'm afraid that in that particular altercation, I'm going to be on Liz Cheney's side. Here's hoping for another hunting accident. Dia Swift says, yes, good article. You cannot negotiate with terrorists, Trump's GOP. And Deborah said he only asked for a pause on leasing, not on drilling, which Trump waved through a ton of permits at the end of his term. Lana, what's a hunting date? Are they going hunting together? But do Getz can't accidentally mistake Liz for a deer? No, that's the Cheney's role, to mistake others for deers. Leanne Williams says, right, it cost me $15 to go to the doctor when I was 16. I paid for it myself. We pay right now. We have Kaiser coverage. We pay $5 to go to the doctor. Evelina says, I read, that European banks are pulling out a fossil fuel investment. But Deborah Wilson says it's like a tag team. And so Dia Swift says, so Getz, correction, my keyboard is misbehaving. And Deborah says, Dems and Reps. Kay says, Leanne, my old family doctor I had for myself and my kids was an older German doctor in the later 80s. He sold everything here and moved back to Germany because he couldn't go for-profit sick care. Evelina says, mining for rare minerals in the new era for clean energy technology isn't all that encouraging, though, if you're a green activist, I know. Dia says, hey, Dr. Joe, question, please. If automation and robotics become efficient enough due to COVID for people not to have to do hoe out in for essential errands, do you think an FJD is necessary? Yes, because there always going to be work to do for people. But if we have an FJG, it's going to be to do necessary work at a distance while you're in your home. There's actually a lot of work like that can be done. Lana says, but do you recall when Dick Cheney went on a hunting date with a few of his friends, accidentally shot one of them? The guy survived, but forever joked Cheney on a hunting date. Yes, I do recall. And Deborah says, good luck with your optimism that Biden is even a mind at work to gain any of this. Okay. I have to say that we've been watching Biden in the transition to the presidency, and since he took over, as president, he has some of the problems that older people have in the way they speak, the way they express themselves, also momentary lapses, in memory, things like that. He has all that. But there's no indication that I could see in his recent speeches and news conferences and things like that that suggests that his mind is anywhere near gone or that he's incapable of making decisions. I'm sorry to say this, but there is another side, to what I say. in the way he is currently screwing up as the President of the United States, it's on him. It's not his cognitive disability. It's his fault. He's doing it intentionally. So whatever he's doing wrong, he's doing intentionally. And we got to blame him because there's no evidence that he's now thinking less well than he used to. I mean, he used to be somebody who made lots and lots of mistakes to be very polite about it. And if he makes a lot of mistakes now, it's not to be put down to his age or his mind. It's to be put down to his neoliberalism. Evelina says, oh, fracking abroad, how nice. Dia Swift says, thanks, Lana. Now I get it, and no, I forgot all about Dick shooting the other guy. Deborah says, thank you. And Leanne Williamson says, they're scared. Evelina says, let them talk about how afraid and tense we the people are. We'll let them know about how afraid and tense we the people are. We the people are very afraid, okay, and very tense. And I personally think that had something to do with the riots at the Capitol, too. People are on edge, and they see enemies everywhere because people are dying. They're dying in unprecedented numbers here. I don't think we've had these numbers of deaths since the Spanish flu. And none of us remembers the Spanish flu. There are some alive who remember World War II. And we were not dying in these numbers in World War II. We have passed fatalities from World War II already, and we're not near over. I mean, before this is over, we could hit 650 to 700,000 fatalities. We've never experienced that here in America.
So,
Except, of course, possibly for the Spanish flu.
didn't Biden say he was going to do fracking? I thought he said it at the beginning.
No, he said he wasn't going to end fracking. He didn't say.
And all I could think of was, why doesn't someone tell him how dangerous it
Yes.
is?
He didn't say he was going to do fracking. He said he wasn't going to ban fracking. Now, what else he does to discourage fracking? Okay, in other words, the executive order and his statements concerning natural gas greatly discourage investments in fracking. So he doesn't have to ban it to harm fracking. So, okay, so Dia Swift says Shell has to pay the Sudanese for damages, finally. That's great. And Deborah says, Dave is awesome. Watched him, okay, on Useful Idiots. Yeah, Dave is a wonderful columnist and journalist. He's a great journalist. He really is a great one. I've been watching him for years. He used to do the daily news, okay, on Fire Dog Lake in 2010, 2011, okay, 2012. I mean, the guy was like a machine. He did 4 news articles a day, every single day. His function there was to do news articles. It wasn't so much opinion columns, things like that. But boy, it was the amount of news he could consume and summarize in those 4 articles he wrote every single day was amazing. Dia Swift said, oh yeah, Biden said the survival bills checks will pass even if Republicans throw another fit, as I'm sure they will. Well, But when will they pass? I would suggest that the longer the Republicans actually delay, the more trouble they give, the more the Democrats should increase the amount of the survival checks. They should change the bill as they go along to compensate for the time that's lost. They should not keep it at the 1,400. First of all, they shouldn't have it at 1,400. They should have it at the 2,000. But then, if the Republicans delay passage by another month, it should go up to $3,000 checks or even $4,000 checks. Steve Gonzo said, instead of going to a doc myself for 3+ issues, I broke the protocol to take the Buckeye rot to the vet. $300, 10 years old, has gum tumor, results Monday, surgery, my teeth dollars with Buckeye health insurance. I'd rather see a veterinarian. I also need glasses. Evelina says, good luck with Buckeye. Leanne Williamson says, exactly. Kay says, I can relate, Steve Gonzo. That's why I won't get another dog. In Ohio, money for dog license and vet bills. Although I doubt any other could replace her anyway. Evelyn says, hard when you're on a fixed income to keep your eyes and teeth in good shape. Wasn't always like that. I know. Kay says, Ohio sucks, but this whole country sucks. Come on, at least Turner, okay, and Jordan, okay, are leaving. Woo. And Kay says, Turner and Jordan are leaving? I thought that Jordan was leaving and Portman was leaving. And Kay says, I've learned the California governor ran on single payer for the state. Well, look what a mess it is now. Right. And, of course, once he got into office, he discouraged the passage of single payer as much as he could. Kay says, the internet keeps going out on me again. Guess I'm going to have to unplug it all night again. Evelina says, shameful. Steve Gonzo says, protesters shut down a massive California vaccination stadium with parking lot filled with people waiting for hours. Oh my God. Those people should be put in jail. They really should be put in jail. Dia says, those new prescription glasses, Joe, I know several people, myself, that went and got eyeglasses with their $600 too. With their $600 too. Oh, and dental help too. No, they're not new prescription glasses. They are, however, new reading glasses, and I buy them for $1 over at the dollar store, and they work fine for me for reading. The only disadvantage is that I have to buy them at various strengths because some glasses are good for reading on my computer, and some glasses are good for reading books, and some glasses are good for reading very, 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 very small print, and so on. But, at $1 a pair, I can afford all the different kinds of glasses. It's just a pain in the neck to always be changing glasses. Russ says, been listening while doing my bookkeeping. Good to see you, Dr. Joe. Great to see you, Russ. It's always great to see you. Dia says, now, if Biden would just free nonviolent offenders that we helped incarcerate with idiotically long sentences and that stupid 3 strikes bull. Kay says, no more nukes. Dia says, shoot. We need living wages in the public sectors. Federal workers are doing okay as it is. Dia says, no underground storage. That's more neoliberal BS. Dia says, why does everything have to be electric? It should be solar. Well, it might be solar power that will be powering the electric cars. Okay, in other words, what would happen is that you plug into recharges that are operating off of solar power. Dia says, what kind of economist is Nick Hanauer, okay, or is he one at all? So I don't know whether Nick Hanauer took economics in school or not. I'm pretty sure he's not a PhD in economics or even, okay, an MA in economics. He's a businessman. He's a billionaire. And he's one of the billionaires, okay, and one of the millionaires, okay, because he was a millionaire before he was a billionaire, who tells people that it's necessary to tax the millionaires and billionaires more. It's necessary to give people more. Okay, it's necessary to make sure people live if, millionaires and billionaires want to survive, and that if they don't stop their bad behavior, the pitchforks, okay, are going to get them. So he's a billionaire who's on our side. And Dia says we want the ABC Act, give us our alphabet funding. Indeed. And Evelina says, why are they so dismissive of MMT? Seems like they just want to keep the status quo. They're all so conservative, really, the whole lot of them. Well, Pollan, okay, and Epstein are not really so conservative. It's just that they're awfully impressed with the possibility of sometime down the road having a really big inflation problem to confront. And I think especially Epstein is concerned about that kind of possibility. Now, he's not a nut about it like Paul Krugman is, but he's also invested in it because he wrote a short book that's critical, okay, of MMT. He invested in trying to become critical, okay, of MMT. I'm not sure Pollan stands in exactly the same place, okay, as Epstein. But generally, the University of Massachusetts School of Economics and the institute there, okay, is one that is generally oriented towards democratic socialism. They're social democrats there. At one point, they were Marxists there, okay, or a number of them, okay, were Marxists. I think there still are some Marxists, okay, that are hanging around there. But one of the professors that comes from there, okay, is Rick Wolff. He now is in New York, okay, teaching at the New School. He's a professor emeritus right now, okay, and so he's back in New York, okay, and he's living there. But he used to be, okay, at the University, okay, of Massachusetts. And he and Sam Bowles changed the character of a department there so that it became a radical economics department. And in the last, 30, 35 years, okay, it's had a reputation for that. It's post-Keynesian, okay, in its economics. It just is not in accord with the MMT school. But the two most radical schools of economics around right now are probably the University of Massachusetts School, okay, and the MMT School of Economics, which used to be entirely based in this country at Kansas City, okay. But now with Stephanie going to Stony Brook, okay, and Randy Ray going to Bard, there are now very many prominent MMT economists, okay, in New York City. So that's become a new center, okay, of MMT. And then some of the MMT graduate students are getting spread around the country as well. Okay, and Dia Swift says, is Biden going to do anything about DeJoy now? I hear people are still having major mail delays and problems. Yeah, we still don't have our survival check for Bonnie yet. even though mine's arrived, hers has not yet. But Dia says, gee, my keyboard is typing badly. I scrolled down too fast. I'm nearing 2.5 hours. Okay, I'm afraid that I'm going to have to take less than all the comments at one point. Okay, at this point, okay, I don't like to do that, but I'm running out of time, I'm afraid. So I'm going to have to say good night to you. I'll very quickly scan. And Kay says, killed my late hubby Scott. And as Evelina points out, 45 million is the entire population of Argentina, including infants. Can't believe that many people are uninsured. Well, they are now. There used to be 45 million people that were uninsured in 2005, and even more were uninsured by 2010. Okay, when the Affordable Care Act was first passed. But even at the height of the Affordable Care Act in 2016, there were still 27 million people, okay, who were but not insured, okay, in the United States. Of course, the population of the United States had grown, and between 2010 and 2020, probably grew by 20 million people. Evelyn says the Tories in the UK are absolutely bananas. Yeah, I know they are. They're bananas. Stupid. And very harmful to the UK, and don't understand why people keep them in power. I don't understand that. Okay, number of other comments. There are very good comments. And Dia says, yeah, Joe, that's how you negotiate with the corrupt GOP. Go up on the survival checks by 1,000 for every month that they obstruct. Woohoo, tell Schmancy to take lessons. Schmancy is right. Dia says, I buy the $1 sunglasses at the dollar store too. Yeah, so do I. I buy $1 sunglasses at the dollar store and $1 reading glasses at the dollar store. And Kay says, I follow Hanauer spelling. Yes, it's Hanauer. And Louis the Fish Donalfo says, so many great ideas. Biden and the USA need guys like Joe Firestone. Thank you, Louis the Fish. What a colorful name. And Deborah Wilson says, good night. Good night, Deborah. Thank you for coming. Dolores Pierce says, thank you and good night. Steve Gonzo says, PSA, FZB, Purging Socialists P. I'm not sure what all that stands for, but good night, Steve, and good night, Dolores, and good night, Deborah, and good night, everybody. Sorry I wasn't able to read everything, but thank you for coming. Thank you for being here. Thank you for staying. And I'll hopefully put together some short takes for tomorrow. I'll certainly have some other tomorrow, okay, on Monday. And I'll be seeing you again for a regular show on Tuesday night. And Kay says, thank you all for another great discussion. I will miss you all until we meet again. And we love you, Kay. Good night.